Hi there, perimenopause. I'm super excited today because this is my 100th episode of the podcast. First off, I'm going to say, like everyone who's ever launched something, I had zero idea how to do it. And I have to thank Heidi at Become. It was because of her I launched a podcast because they sponsored the first two seasons. And I'm super grateful for that. I had no idea how to do it. And every little thing seemed so difficult. And the truth is, you just have to start because now that I'm at 100, I don't want to go back and listen to the first 10. I'm sure they sound god awful. And thank you to Magnificent Midlife, Rachel Lancaster, because actually hers I recorded and the sound was so bad. She said, we have to record it again. And how nice is that? She's like a super great woman. And her husband works in sound, so she's particularly attuned. But the sound was terrible, and I was at my wit's end that day. And I've learned so much. I'm not promising the sound's going to be great on this, but I notice even the top podcasts I like to listen to, I'll say, "Why do you sound like you're in a tube? Like you have way more resources than me. This should sound better. Your guests should sound better. I mean, there's all sorts of AI little mechanisms you can use." Just drinking my iced coffee. Okay, so I've learned more from this podcast than probably anything else. And that's because I've talked to so many interesting people. And, for the most part, I've avoided the obvious people. And I've done that for a reason. I sometimes think that the obvious people who are the most popular on social media have sort of lost control of their egos. And that leads to a state that is the opposite of curiosity. And I think we're in such a place right now where we know so little, even though we know a lot, that there's no place for that. And, I have talked to a few people like that, but for the most part, I've sought out experts that have really resonated with me that are ahead of the curve and they're humble, and that was just something that really struck me as important when I started out. And recently I read that Menopause Mystery, The Change. One of the characters said in there that she had developed the ability to see with her own two eyes. And I feel like this transmenopausal year I just passed through, I have emerged with that ability myself. And I had it, but I just feel more certain of it. So, ego, hubris, narcissism, and just plain ignorance get in the way of us figuring this out. And so I avoid that. And I also love talking about things that are controversial. Sometime in my 40s, I came up with this thing where I said, there's no board of directors of the way things should be. And I also don't think that there is a list of things we are not allowed to talk about unless we are talking about how dangerous they are. But there seems to be an unspoken list. And something people don't talk about in this menopause space is that a lot of this aggression and anger and weird stuff, comes from women. And I'm all for the sisterhood too. And I've met essentially the nicest people. But when you start talking about a few things that I have tackled, you get people hopping in social media to say it's dangerous and you're putting women at risk. And I don't think talking about things and asking questions does that. But I'm a journalist, so what would I know? As I'm saying this list and anything you listen to in this podcast, this is not medical advice. I am not a doctor. I am a journalist interviewing doctors, and you should definitely consult a healthcare practitioner before you make any decisions about your menopause experience or anything to do with your own health. Obviously, we don't go alone. We're not doctors. And so please bear that in mind anytime you're listening to Hot Flashings podcast. Okay, let's get started. Number one, we need men in this conversation. I find whenever I have a man on the podcast, it's like a breath of fresh air. Same as when I talk to one of my guy friends. We need men regardless. Men go through andropause, which is a sort of a form of menopause due to their dwindling testosterone. So there's that. Talk to Dr. Quintinary, a British GP. I was happy to talk to him about that. Recently had on the British OBGYN Vikram Talalekar. Just so humble, just so smart, so considerate and open-minded. And of course, the all-time favorite here is Arizona-based OBGYN Dr. Burt Webb, who I just love so much. I made 2 podcasts. Everything out of his mouth was just so valuable. He's everything. And I'm really sorry to say that he passed away recently. And I'm going to look a little bit more into that and write a nice obit for what I knew of him. And I could tell from his social media that everyone else knew those things from him too. And when we spoke, he was going through cancer treatment, but he was very upbeat about beating it. And I'm just really, really sad that I won't be talking to him again, because he was on the expert panel and he was someone that behind the scenes was really supportive of me too. And I just think we need these guys, I don't like this us or them tone that I see. Okay, another thing that's become clear to me is that we're getting bamboozled about a couple of things. I don't like bamboozlement. In my personal life, when I get that weird feeling like, okay, what is going on? I'm just like, I don't need to know what's happening. I just know I'm feeling bamboozled. So one thing is this obsession with estrogen and replacing our depleted estrogen. It's so strange. Estrogen is very important. Hormone therapy, replacing, replenishing, topping up estrogen is important. Progesterone, it's sort of the main cause of chaos in early perimenopause. And yet it's basically overlooked. Whenever I have a mainstream doctor on here, progesterone or progestins are just sort of like, you got to take it, because when you prescribe a woman with a uterus estrogen, you need to offset it with progesterone or progestin, because estrogen makes things grow and it will make the lining of the endometrium grow. And it could lead to endometrial hyperplasia or even uterine cancer. So that just shows you, first of all, how serious hormone therapy can be, right? Like that it could have that effect. And second, how wacky it is that we've focused on estrogen. The integrative naturopathic world is very, very into progesterone, but they're sometimes still looked at as wacky. And I just started thinking across all these interviews I've done with people like the naturopathic Dr. Lara Bryden in New Zealand, or Kirsty Holland in Australia, or the endocrinologist Jerry Lynn Pryor out there at UBC in Vancouver. She is probably the foremost thinker and researcher about progesterone. And it just sort of makes you wonder why people get vajiggy when you talk about it, and why the focus is on estrogen. We're an orchestra of hormones. And the same comes to testosterone, because testosterone is also incredibly abundant. First of all, there's people talking all about testosterone and everything it can do now. And I'm not sure that the research is there. And we've heard from experts who say the research isn't there. But also we hear that testosterone can be dangerous. Testosterone pellets can be dangerous. Hormones prepared in a compounding pharmacy are dangerous. When you talk to people on the ground, people prescribing, people preparing, people taking. I've had multiple people on this podcast who have used testosterone pellets and like them because they don't have to remember to put testosterone on. And Dr. Angela DeRosa, that was a great episode. She worked in the Intrinsic patch almost 20 years ago. That was the female testosterone patch that was rejected by the FDA. And she said, we don't understand how to measure testosterone at the cellular level. So the way you measure how it's working is to monitor the patient and see how they're doing, and making sure they don't grow a beard and act really aggressive and that they're feeling better. And she said a lot of doctors don't know this. Even Peter Attia, someone of his height, mentioned this issue where we don't actually know how to measure testosterone at the cellular levels to know how it's working. So I think that's very, very interesting. And another, awesome podcast about the bamboozling was when I went straight to the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding and interviewed Scott Brenner, the CEO, and Dr. Jennifer Birch, a compounding pharmacist in North Carolina. And we learned firsthand that their industry is stringently regulated by the FDA. Compounding pharmacists have a lot of schooling. They're very accomplished and experienced. And the labs are regulated by the FDA, but the individual preparations, which are often made to accommodate women who don't do well on commercial preparations, can't be regulated. You can't have someone sitting in your lab all day looking over someone's shoulder in every compounding lab in the world. And that we're caught in the middle of industry fighting here. And that's unfortunate. But these are things I've learned. You have to take away from them what you can and do your own research. One of the most important things that I learned on this podcast was Alicia Jackson saying, you have to be the CEO of your own health. This is the time to step up and pull it together. Be responsible. We're hearing everywhere that we should take hormone therapy to prevent cardiovascular disease and dementia, but I've asked almost every expert this, and only one or two have said yes. Hormone therapy comes with risks and side effects. It's safest in that window if you take it from 10 years of the onset of menopause. But there's situations where hormone therapy can actually lead to cardiovascular disease. And we have episodes that address that too. So it's not as simple. I think you would want to get a cardio workup before you would go on hormone therapy simply to prevent cardiovascular disease. And on the topic of hormone therapy being a preventative for disease, obviously there are applications to prevent osteoporosis, and hormone therapy is recommended by guiding bodies, including the Menopause Society in North America, for that purpose. But when it comes to cardiovascular disease, I had Catherine Lindley, an MD and clinical investigator in the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She was one of the authors of a review published in the American Heart Association journal Circulation. That was a study that looked at 96 papers, and they just don't recommend hormone therapy for prevention of cardiovascular disease. And I know this goes against, and it blows minds. I was speaking to a naturopathic doctor behind the scenes who was like, we know it does. Well, this may bear out, but at the moment, there are studies saying it does, studies saying it doesn't. There's a lot that goes into it. I haven't had a dementia specialist on, but I did have Joyce Harper on the podcast. This is a professor of reproductive science at University College London, and she has read all of the dementia papers, and she would love to find another preventative for dementia because she has it in her family, but she said it's not there. I don't see it. And no guiding bodies in the world recommend hormone therapy to prevent cardiovascular disease or dementia. So, after hearing this over and over and over, then I turn on social media and I see people confidently saying that it does prevent cardiovascular disease and dementia. It is enough to do your head in, but there are so many things we know that prevent cardiovascular disease and dementia that I feel reasonably okay at this time of my life, taking steps forward, not needing hormone therapy for symptoms, and, just making my merry way. And if I do decide to do that, it will be after careful consideration, because there are risks with hormone therapy and it's not fashionable to talk about them. That's for sure. And I would say 9 out of 10 experts would say, don't go on hormone therapy to prevent disease. Do all the other things we know prevents disease. I just spoke to an epidemiologist the other day, and he was saying it's like movement, nutrition, don't smoke, don't drink, do those things. And let's not worry so much for now if it prevents dementia and cardiovascular disease, because we already know a lot about what prevents those diseases. Keeping your blood sugar in place, watching those levels and the insulin resistance are probably the best things you can do. Spend your time on that. You know what I mean? And then we have the Harvard study saying good relationships are one of the top reasons people live long and don't get disease. And I think having purpose and living in alignment are pretty good bets too. Numero 4, menopause is not estrogen deprivation or deficiency or a disease or a syndrome. And if there's one thing I'm really confident about, it's this. I just heard estrogen deprivation in the last week, and it's like, bleh. It's really catchy, and it's also so offensive. It also creates a victim mentality, right? Because if someone's depriving me of estrogen I'm supposed to have, then there's a villain, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I better just replace it. And replace it if you want, replace it if you need, but not on some wonky term. Some of the very best experts, British endocrinologist Denise Mukherjee, Dr. Geraldine Pryor, Lara Bryden, Vikram Telalakar, Dr. Burt Webb, Suzanne Gilbert-Lenz, these are people that don't need to make up words and adopt drug company messaging to help you. They just help you. If it works so well, if everything's so good, you don't need to make up stuff. That always got my spidey sense tingling when I was reporting. Okay, the 5th thing I've learned is that there are so many things you can do for your vagina. Come on. Okay, episodes of Cindy Barshop of V-Spot, a spa in New York City. Brooke Fott, a nurse practitioner in Nashville. Dr. Karen Eilber, Burt Weber, Rachel Rubin, Kim Vopni, Pelvic Health. Listen to those. I have the best episode coming up with someone who has created an amazing product for the vagina and has the best story of vaginal rejuvenation that I think you will ever hear. That is coming up in the next couple of weeks. But bottom line, there is no need for your vagina to head off into the sunset. You have to get involved, right? We've got vaginal estrogen. Brooke Fott, the nurse practitioner in Nashville, Tennessee, presented to the North American Menopause Society a couple of years ago about how she's using topical testosterone combined with vaginal estrogen. And she's the person who introduced me to this term muted orgasms, where things just aren't as say fireworks level as they used to be. And that can be sort of healed too. Jennifer Harrington at ND in Australia talked about compounded preparations using vitamin E and things I've never heard of that can be, put in the area. If you listen to Dr. Webb, oh, sweet Dr. Webb, talk about all the options. There's sound therapy, there's lasers, there's O shots, there's ultrasound. Dr. Karen Eilber in Beverly Hills, the OBGYN urogenital expert, talked about the importance of sex, masturbation, using a vibrator, even if you don't have an orgasm, just to get that blood flowing to the area. You wouldn't sit on the couch with your feet up till the end of time and expect to be able to use your feet. It's just the way it is. I was also very pleased that Dr. Albert said boric acid works for bacterial vaginosis. This is heresy in the medical community. And she's just so open-minded. She's like, it does work. You have to be careful with it. Dr. Burt Webb, he talked all about the importance of gut health in perimenopause and the importance of gut health on your vagina, the vaginal microbiome and the connection between the two. And he just saw it in his practice for decades. So, your vagina is not going to be okay if your gut's not okay. And I can speak to that from personal experience, if you know what I mean. Number 7, and this is controversial, it's ahead of the curve, but I will say it, that if and when I do go on menopause hormone therapy, I'm testing a few things first. I was very compelled by hearing Jennifer Harrington in Australia, Kirsty Holland, DNA company founder Kashif Khan in Toronto. You want to know how you're metabolizing your estrogen. Dr. Harrington talked about her own situation with fibroids and checking her own estrogen metabolizing pathways. It can go down the 2, the 4, or the 16. You want to check that it's being done in the right way to reduce your chances of causing any growth. Estrogen makes things grow. It makes good things grow, hair and nails. It makes bad things grow. And most forward-thinking people are looking at the research and knowing that there is a link between HRT and cancer, however much it's being downplayed. So why not figure where it's coming from? Kashif, the DNA guy, said, look, if you don't know how you're metabolizing your estrogen and you're metabolizing it in the wrong way and you go on HRT and you don't heal because you can, sort of change this metabolization, he said you can give yourself cancer. So that's good enough for me. I'm in the middle of doing a test right now. I'm working with a company and you will be hearing more about it later. And I will take it on the neck from all the people who will say there's no science to this. There is a ton of science. Kirsty Holland, who's over there in Australia, said to me, show me how testing for this is dangerous. If you can tell me why testing is dangerous, I'd love to hear about it. And I really love when she said that. Jennifer Harrington also got GI mapping done because she said, there's also in the gut, we metabolize estrogen via the estrobolome. I hope I'm saying that right. Is it being excreted? Are you recycling it? Recycling it isn't good. We can do microbiome testing. She also got a vaginal microbiome test. I'm going to test everything out and see what's what. I've alluded to this before, but number 8 is the smartest people know they don't know what they don't know. These are my favorite people. These are my favorite people. We have 10% of the studies on menopause that we have on pregnancy, a fraction of the studies that we have on male medical conditions. You got to be humble. You got to be open. You got to follow the science as it unfolds. It's not set in stone. Number 9, the thing I've learned, and I'm so glad that I paid attention to this, no big decisions until you're through menopause. Obviously, you've got to change some things in your life if they need to be changed. But when I spoke to Lynette Shepherd, who is the menopause goddess over there in Hawaii early on in the podcast, she's a retired nurse living in Hawaii. She is amazing. She went through menopause. She grabbed a group of women and built herself a community, because that is what we need. That's what we're doing here. I think there were 15 of them roughly, and many of them were frustrated with their partners. And we hear this all the time. Like, you just imagine life without them, right? And I can't speak to this because I'm single, but it translated to other things in my life. You just want to chuck everything at some points. You're so uncomfortable with yourself, especially in that transmenopausal year that I've just been through. I felt like my skin didn't fit on my body a lot of the time. I felt like I remember being at my friend's cottage this summer. It's supposed to be my happy place. And I just wanted to lie underneath the cottage and listen to everyone talk. That's what I wanted to do. Like, I know it would be gross in there, but I just wanted to be somewhere where I could hear them, but not have to engage. And it was rough. And so, Lynette Shepherd's group, they decided no divorces until we're through this. And in the end, only one couple divorced, she said. And I think that is just so wonderful. A lot of people, when they go through grief or they go through a big experience, they'll change everything right away. And you're really not yourself. And this is a big, big, big one. So no big decisions. Number 10 is something I already knew, but I have become so much more certain of it. Menopause is the ultimate heroine's journey. You can portray this as a vulnerability, as a time when we're weak and fragile, or you can portray it as a time when we are faced with the opportunity of our lifetime to sort it out. And you do not have to do it all at once. Some days you can barely get through the day. You didn't sleep. You feel awful. Your stomach hurts. Your body hurts. You're having hot flashes. Your kids, your parents, I get it. But somewhere in this transition, you're going to figure this out. You're going to just take one step and then another step and another step. And you're going to answer the call to examine everything you brought with you and everything that's going on right now. And I think sometimes if you don't, life is going to force you to, in the form of like something, a job loss or a relationship demise or a death or something like that. Some sort of reckoning. And with reckoning comes reclamation. And if there's one thing I don't love about the current conversation, it's the tendency to portray women as sort of victims in all this, like this shouldn't be happening to us, and we're just sort of being buffeted about. And the truth is, it's a transition that's meant to happen, and change is hard. And this one takes a long time, or it can take a long time. And you just need to hang in and do what you can with what you have. And I promise you, the road will unfold. This time last year, I was in a really bad way. This time 10 years ago, I was in a really bad way. This time 7 years ago, I was in a really bad way. Maybe this time next year, I'll be in a really bad way, but I don't know, because I feel like all my senses are firing now. And I'm just coming out of this freaking storm. And I wouldn't trade this feeling for anything. And there's been a lot of grief and regret that I didn't feel like this earlier, and I didn't get to know myself earlier, and I didn't process some of the things that I've spent a lot of time working on earlier, but this is how it was meant to happen. So those are my 10 things I've learned. I've learned a squillion more than that, but I'm going to keep this podcast going. I don't see any reason to stop. I am so happy and grateful to each and every single person who has listened. You are superstars, and you have given me a connection that has helped me more than you will ever, ever know. And I just created a t-shirt to celebrate the 100th anniversary. And I've been saying this to people that I love. You can be in my perimenopause, okay? You're all in my perimenopause, which is also the menopause. I love you. Thank you so, 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 so much. And I'll see you next week with a really cool guest.